Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Tim Garvin, who has written this wonderful book called Everything Makes Sense. Hello, Tim.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. Your title is very ambitious, I feel. Please explain. Everything makes sense.
Well, I kind of wrote a book to do that, but I'll do my best here. The title was chosen because uh, I think we're living in a time when the discoveries of science and of the invisible world, which is most of the world, are becoming more and more conjunct. Science is beginning to reveal the contours of the invisible world. And although it may be immune to instrumentation, it is more and more amenable to supposition that there must be some force that we can't see and identify. And of course, we do have the conjectures about dark matter and dark energy, which compose, according to science, 95, I think it is 95% of existence. And those worlds are have been known about for a long time, but science has devoted itself for the last 200 or 300 years to measurement of the physical world only, and it's then had to exclude, as was right for its own discipline, many of the previous conjectures, which didn't know anything about galaxies and molecules, but now that those things have become prominent, those previous thinkers, we call them seers or mystics or perfect masters. Their work is becoming more and more enfolded into contemporary thinking, and philosophy is a branch now called panpsychism, which is the idea that every part of the universe is part of consciousness, and that's been always the dilemma of modern science, that they've had a doctrine called, well, it was first called scientific materialism, that we must study the evident measurable world. It's now called physicalism, but it's the same idea that the world is made of particles and molecules, and we are now leaving that idea behind. It's become it's become apparently misguided and easily seen. Honestly, it seems to me more and more by more and more thinkers that we need some better idea of the world, and the ideas of the world that are full of, I know you're an astrologer, and we don't quite know, I don't at least know how astrology works, but I do understand from my own life that it does. And I also, I know that the ideas of the mystics of the world of Vedanta, Buddhist mystics, Sufism, Christian, esoteric Christianity, they're all coincident. They have different substructures, and they might be slightly different, but in general, they have the same idea. In fact, Genghis Khan, I don't know if you know this about that horrible man supposedly, but he gathered all the thinkers of his age to try to get them to understand that there was one God, and it was that we were all living in a divine phenomenon, and that was his point of view. And it was the point of view, of course, it's always been the point of view of mystics. Uh, but how? So I wrote this book, Everything Makes Sense, because I wanted to examine for contemporary philosophers and scientists some of the, because there are two founding, uh, uh, you may call them paradigms that guide thinkers in the universities at this point, and they are neo-Darwinism, which is Darwinism with molecular biology added, and physicalism, which is the nature of the existence is the molecules, but and quarks and muons, Higgs bosons, but those things are devoid of an understanding of the nature of intelligence. Intelligence itself, which I'm exhibiting right now, and you are by listening, and everybody who's listening, we all creatures of intelligence, and that the foundation of intelligence has been mysterious forever, and now we are beginning to slowly gravitate to a deeper investigation of that, and we come to the ancient notions, that have always been most valuable in every age and every doctrine, And that is that humility, for some reason, is a much more valued commodity than arrogance and pride. But why? Why should that be? Why shouldn't it be that the proud and the arrogant are just as admired? But no, they never are. Why is that? Something in the psyche of man understands that humility is a better mental station than pride and arrogance. There's something limiting about those stations. And we understand that selfishness is less valuable to us than generosity, and not because of morality. No, no, not because of some prescription from outside us, but something inside the psyche mandates to us that those are the elements of the deep psyche that have more value to us than any others. These are the lying around facts of existence that science, due to its physicalist mandate, and has and Darwinism, which even Darwin lamented that. My God, I think I've overthrown all the high-minded thought systems. I don't think we need God anymore. And that of course, was a distress to him, but yet it became a kind of a prevailing doctrine. It gave atheism a firm stance. And I don't decry atheism. Atheism is a natural outlet, a natural function of the way science has progressed. But all through this, even among atheists, we always have known that depth is better than superficiality. That's an interesting feature of consciousness, that depth is better than superficiality, humility better than pride. And those notions, from those notions, you can begin to build a structure of thinking that invites, well, it doesn't invite, I don't say we've cleared up the mysteries. There are going to be mysteries at the periphery always. I don't think until one becomes infinitely conscious, God realized that those mysteries are cleared up. But we at least can begin to cite a reasonable conjecture about the nature of the universe, that it is, we are all in the belly of God being slowly digested, as I put it in the book. And that's a fine place to begin the inner exploration. And all of this work is an inner exploration. And now I'm going to stop and let you have something to say.
There's so much in what you said, but I think the importance of humility is paramount, because it is the lack of humility amongst those who see the world purely in physical terms and purely in Darwinian terms that causes so much problem. You know, it's that fundamentalist view of science, which, you know, whenever you see that rigid a dogma, that is what we associate with the downside of religion. And so we have these two apparently disparate sides behaving in an equally arrogant way, excluding all possibility but that which they believe to be the reality of the world through their eyes and their filters. So it is, as you say, extremely limiting, because it fails to take into account the experience that people have had for millennia. And, you know, you were talking about how
Very true.
so much science is now kind of going, oh, well, maybe there's something in this. And I could hear all the mystics through the centuries going, we told you so. You know,
Indeed.
it's
You know, the opposition between science and religion is natural, inevitable, and very useful. After all, religion was full of myths and superstition, and wasn't it was hopeful, and it was positive, but it was also oppressive and restrictive and repressive. And science, when it finally found a way to overthrow religion, my God, it didn't want to go back and suffer the indignities of all those hordes of misguided people asserting themselves again. No, no. Science wanted to, and so they decided, well, the only safe retreat here is atheism, or at least a fierce agnosticism. And that's all fine, because spirituality doesn't rest on belief. It rests on experience. And that's the difference between the spirit, the coming wave. And I think and I think you agree because I've listened to your podcast, that there is a coming wave of new understanding. And of course, I have just a little bit. Should I give a little bit of my biography? It might be
Oh, yes.
interesting to people. Yeah, I was a philosophy student in school and college, and I began reading philosophy even earlier. And I thought, well, I should. This is the serious deep thinkers, and I should. This is interesting to me. I didn't find I had no appetite to listen to preachers from the pulpit because they seemed to be just as wrong as me. And so I was fascinated by philosophy, but then I quickly came to realize that the dust there was merely finer. I was still facing the aridity of emptiness. And so what to do? Well, then I went and I began to read. I found in the university, I was at LSU, Louisiana State University, and I found a book, and I had a good philosophy professor too, who was a phenomenological existentialist, which was a branch of philosophy that was very much experiential. It was still highly theoretical and highly intellectual, but it did offer. Sartre used to say he was one of those that you could get philosophy from a spoon was particularly fascinating to him, and so I found the books of Aurobindo Ghosh, and Aurobindo Ghosh had 4 volumes of letters to his disciples. He was a great saint who lived in India, wrote 30 volumes, died in 1950, but a very well regarded by the intellectual world, and all his books are available online now. But I bought his complete works and just read them diligently, and fell in love with his letters to his disciples because they were telling me what I was experiencing in the inner world, the nature of the vital world, the nature of what he called the soul force, the psychic being, which I was experiencing. I was experiencing that, and then I met a man who introduced me to Meher Baba, and I didn't even know Meher Baba existed. I didn't know the name, but I began having further inner experiences concerned with that. And I had been meditating and doing the things that you do when you become a young seeker, and reading the books, Yogananda, Ramakrishna, these and that. But then I came across Meher Baba, and it wasn't the books that did something, but I did have an inner experience, and I went down to the center. He has a center here in America, at Myrtle Beach. It's 500 acres on the ocean, and there are no proselytizing or rituals or anything, but it is a place that he lived. He traveled there, and then I finally went to India and met those. He had died in 1969, and that's when I found out about him, just after he died. But I went to India many times. I've been there many times, and listening to and speaking with those who knew him and lived with him all their lives and were trained with him. And he wrote a book. He wrote several books. One of them is called God Speaks, published in 56, I think. And another is The Discourses, which were published in the 30s. And they are, the Discourse is really a manual of spirituality. It's a beautiful guide through the inner world. And God Speaks is a wonderful cosmology. It's interesting to note that formerly there was a Belgian priest, just a little byline here. There was a Belgian priest named George Lamarck, and he was an astrophysicist. And in 1927, he published the first known exposition of the universe having begun from what he called a singularity, a little spot somehow just manifested and became the universe. And it was just how that happened. He didn't know, but he did know that all the galaxies of the cosmos that we see are moving away from us. Before, there was what was called the steady state theory, which is even Einstein thought of that things were just fixed in space. But then Lamarck and others, Edward Hubble also, after became convinced that no, things are moving away from us at a very fast speed. After all, it's hard to tell how fast things are. This universe is 93 billion light years in diameter, they say. That's the current estimate. but what the point I was getting to, in 1925, Meher Baba had written a book in a little village in Maharashtra, the state of Maharashtra, where Mehrabad is now, in which he described the universe having begun from the Om point, which is the same George Lamarck conception. Anyway, that cosmology that Meher Baba has given us in God Speaks is going to become interesting to science one day. And there's a lot of supplements. A lot of books are being published now. One is called Infinite Intelligence, another book by Baba. Anyway, a very interesting life and experience, and of course he claimed to be the avatar. That is that emanation of divinity that occurs from time to time through the centuries. Jesus was that. Muhammad was that. Krishna, Rama, Zoroaster, Buddha were that. That God, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, and finds it necessary to come to creation from time to time and give the world a straightening and a spiritual push. And God knows I'm utterly absent of knowledge about why, but that he does that seems reasonable to me. And every time those avatars come, they leave in their wake a great trail of spirituality and of impressions of divinity. Jesus becomes little children. 2 commandments: love God, love your fellow man. Which are not commandments; they're just Zoroaster: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. They always revitalize things. The Eightfold Path of Buddha. Everything is always changed and given new orientation and strengthened, and every time those beings come. Baba did say this about his. He says, "You don't know if I'm the avatar, but if you want to tell people that, go ahead. But from your mouth to their ear might be your business, but from their ear to the heart is my business." So I leave that subject like that. Yeah.
Just taking that all in for a moment. Why is this important? Why should we be exploring why we're here? Why ask these questions? I mean, they're not going to feed us or clothe us.
No, those are good questions, and the answer is simply because we've eventually developed, and of course reincarnation is a part of these philosophies, of these spiritual views. We eventually, after having lived for many lifetimes, we develop an inner ache, which does not go away, and we can call it many things, but the name I use is longing, and Meher Baba has used that as well, and of course Aurobindo and all the great saints. Kabir said, he was a poet in India, lived several hundred years ago. He said, when the guest meaning the inner world, the inner guide, when the guest is being searched for, it is longing for the guest which does all the work. And that's the case. We do feel, however much involved we get in any subject, anything, there is a persistent and pesky loneliness that accompanies us through the day, and we want that settled. And that's because the little self that we identify with feels beyond it a big self somewhere, and of course that can devolve into preaching from the pulpit, and that's the lamentable fact of being in this divided world full of our own egotism and others as well. But still, that longing is a fact of existence. It's not wishful thinking. It's just there with us always, and we want resolution for that, and that is, according to Aurobindo and Meher Baba and all the saints, that is a natural feature of human existence. When you finally become human, you are conscious as much as you're going to become conscious. But what are you conscious of? You're conscious of what is called Maya, or illusion. So it looks like we're not sitting around seeing the effulgence of God everywhere, but yet a good supposition is that it exists. And what should we do? What should we do all day in order to better our acquaintance with that divine presence? It's not a question of being good or being moral. It's a question of seeking in the inner world for inner contact. and many ways to do that, I guess. Many have. There's so many, I mean, we can talk about that a lot, but the essential fire of that search is longing. Yeah.
And I would agree that it's a bit like the desire to go home, that yearning,
Yeah.
being exiled. And I think that that's why there are so many myths about being thrown out of paradise and the exile
Yeah.
from paradise. It's
True.
because that is the experience of the human. That is the human experience. The soul coming in is it into this very dense um, dimension in which
Yeah.
let's let's face it, things are not always pleasant. There would be a yearning to go and be part of the one again and feel that that unconditional love, which
Yeah.
we struggle to experience here. But I was also thinking, when you were talking about that longing, it occurred to me that those who are adamant that there is nothing more than the physical. I was just toying with the idea that perhaps the longing is too painful and they'd rather switch it off. Or there's a feeling or a fear of dissolving, which is actually driving that very narrow viewpoint. It's purely a question I'm toying with because the psychologist side of me recognizes that where there is such an adamant, I was going to say belief in something, and I think it is a belief, there's usually a great deal of emotional stuff at stake there. The
I
stakes.
know that's your work, and I know I've listened to your podcasts and your descriptions of of hypnotherapy and the life coaching that you can do with that, and you are, I think, very on the money about that. I think that you may say that the emotional envelope that we come bearing out of childhood, and of course we as we think there are scars from other existences as well, but we do come bearing a load from both previous existences and from childhood, and that's why I think it was Jesus who said, "Become as little children." To get down to that emotional envelope is the quest of this life. It's not the final quest, but it is the beginning of when that love begins to, because then you see, wow, geez, I'm just like everybody else. There's not a lot of difference, none, between me and everybody else. Uh, in fact, can I tell you a poem? Tell you a poem. This poem is almost a summary of everything makes sense in a sense. It's called "Report to Modernity," and I think you might enjoy this, and your readers, your listeners. Report to Modernity. You've heard it all before. The soul talk and God talk and la, la, la. You said fine. But anyone who made all this is certainly a prick. Cancer kills the kids, you said. Armies kill the poor. Besides, you're busy. And if next door they're lost in hatred, it's nothing you did. It's vexing, though. And the questions end in silence. Anyway, everyone says it's just one thing after another. You're already your parents' age, and so far that's true. It's been lots of talk and a long blank stare. At least the silence doesn't accuse you anymore. At least disappointment doesn't disappoint you anymore. What you mostly need is courage now, and what you mostly want is rest. But listen to this hopefulness. I scratched a hole in my heart, deep in the dark, behind belief. I found a wall made thin by 50 years of need, and on my knees I wore away a hole. First warmth, then light. Now I have company. I know you're busy, but I'm making this report in case. That's that poem.
I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah,
Thank you so much for that. That is absolutely,
yeah, yeah. That poem is in the book. Everything Makes Sense, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
my yeah. I don't. I didn't. I've never published my poetry, but I found a good cause, good places for several of them in the book. Uh, Many other poems by other poets are there as well. Here's a one. Here's a beautiful one. You know, Coleman Barks is the recent interpreter of Rumi, and he lives in Georgia. But um, there's a little fragment from Coleman, from Rumi, that Coleman rendered from Rumi, from the Masnawi, Rumi's long epic poem. Who looks out with my eyes? What is the soul? I cannot stop asking. If I could taste one sip of an answer, I could break out of this prison for drunks. I didn't come here of my own accord, and I can't leave that way. Whoever brought me here will have to take me home. I just love that poem. I tell you, it touches me every time I read it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
it, it is absolutely
Mm.
beautiful. You talk in your book about close noticing. Tell us.
Yes. Well, the reason I came across that phrase, let me, I'll say this, uh, just as an astrologer, by the way, I got a bunch of planets in the third house, a whole bunch. As you can tell, I write stuff. But in any case, um, the idea of close noticing is when you begin to consider the nature and substance of existence, you look out at the world, at the external world, and there's just a bunch of hard-shelled facts which don't have a lot of foundation in your own experience. But when you begin to close notice, and as a psychotherapist, this is what you do. You get people to attend to how they feel. And when you close notice, you just notice how the universe is set up. I mean, there's so many ways you can discuss the power and use of close noticing. It is just noticing the world as it is experienced, as it is. How when I see a coffee cup, I recognize I'm not astonished. I see, well, it's a coffee cup. And then and it's sitting there in my hand. Then I look over and I see the coffee cup in your hand, and I am likewise not astonished, but it's utterly different than my coffee cup. And there is this is a little philosophical close notice, and I'm not going to subject you to the tedium of that, but I will say that noticing how existence is arrayed before us is to piece apart the texture of what we call Maya, which is this illusion that we're established in. And by close noticing, we can't come too far with the intellect, but you can come to the door and dispense with all the illusions and all the supporting myths and all the religion and all the philosophies and sciences. And you can come to the door of where inner experience begins. And close noticing is essentially a form of honesty. It's a form of letting be what is. It's a form of humility. In fact, humility and honesty are the same thing. There's just zero difference between them. In the same way that, oddly, it's a lovely discovery, but truth with a capital T, the actual what isness of existence, and love with a capital L are also the same thing. We are always enfolded in this very kindly presence, which is escorting us through eternity. And we'll get there eventually. Yes, and sometimes your child dies, and a hurricane kills the villains and the poets, the same damn storm. And there's a lot of confusion, and we need an overweening philosophy so that everything can make sense, which is what I attempted to do in this book by incorporating many what seem to be disparate religious and spiritual traditions, because they're really all the same. But the supreme one now seems to me the work of Meher Baba, and second only to Aurobindo, or Aurobindo is second to that. But because he was speaking from such an exalted point of view, I don't have that point of view, but I recognize it, and it makes deep sense to me. and so it crystallizes all the other thoughts I have. They organize themselves like leaves on the trunk of this great tree, and so that's and so through close noticing, through simple honesty, and through simple penetration into the inner world, we can come to it. Well, I say somewhere in the book that when people disagree, it is not only usually, but always about ideas neither of them fully understand, because there's only one truth. And if you finally could come to that truth, you would all say, yeah, yeah. But unfortunately, whoever made this world figured out that some of it's going to be conscious, but most of it's not. Most of it is going to be unconscious. And boy, that means we have to communicate and stumble around with the clumsy stilts of ideas which are buried deep in the unconscious. We're walking in mystery, and that's inevitable, and that's why our lives are mostly just good enough. Always a kind of press on regardless knowledge, which we have to struggle through with. There's always a murkiness, but there is a useful way in thinking, and that is through honesty, through close noticing, through simplicity, through humility, that we can at least come to the beginning of the inner world, which is where experience goes, and that's the work that you do when you try to discuss. And Carl Jung used to say, every psychologist has two patients simultaneously. One, the self that their patient is conscious of, and the other, the self that only the psychologist is conscious of in them, and he's trying to guide them together. And anyway, I have great admiration for Jung, but as many of us do. But anyway, that's that. Why am I going off on this riff? You had asked me a question, close noticing, and I come. It's somehow the case that when these discussions, when I get to talking, I don't know where to stop, because it all just is like a snake eating its tail. It's all together. It all makes the same sense to me. It goes on and on and on. But it's also true that we need talk now. We need talk. The world needs these words to be said to them, because we have locked ourselves into many false alleyways, and it's hard to get out. We need to get back to the thoroughfare. And when the thoroughfare, the main river flows to the ocean. You got to get back to that main river.
We do. And, I was just listening to you talking about the need for talk and communication. And yet, there's a section right at the start of your book where you talk about the problem with language. And I was listening to you and I was thinking, how do we do this? How do we communicate without language getting in the way? Because people read one text and there are as many interpretations as there are people, and then start the arguments over the interpretation. And there's the fact that language sometimes gets in the way because it is very cerebral and quite analytical in many respects. And you say it in your book, how can you convey the taste of an apple? And it's absolutely right. How do we? And I think this is where I think close noticing is really important, because it's about being present and it's about paying attention and going beyond the words to actually feel what's behind them. Because I think that if we could do that, we would advance far more quickly. Because we'd be wanting, in order to do that, we have to have the intention and the humility to truly feel and understand the other.
There has to be. You're so right, and there is a phrase that's used in the book called inner nakedness, and that's really you have to go barefooted without presuppositions through the world, and that's what that awakening of humility is. It's a form of awakening, there's no doubt. But one thing Meher Baba did say prescient in this regard is that 2,000 years ago, during the Greek Renaissance in the 400, 500 BC, uh, age, that was the age of when reason began. We began to think cognitively. Intellect became the fruit and flower of creation, and it finally led to science. It led through many, many byways and lanes, and of course there was always argument, and life is never anything but a giant confusion. But science did begin to finally dominate and throw out the bums, as they thought. But yet, as you say, concepts, every idea that you ever have is a generalization. A generalization. It's not the thing itself. It's not it's not the actual experience. You know, you're a woman. That's just a generalization. You're this person that I'm seeing here, and you can. Well, you're a mystery to me, honestly. Everybody is, but the idea that uh, uh, that uh, that we are confined in words is a very true idea. And Mayor Baba said, we are coming now to the age of intuition, because at the foundation of every idea, there is some intuitive feeling. Otherwise, there would be nothing for language to name. There would be nothing for language to name. If you tell me coffee cup, it creates an impression in me. Something about coffee cups, I know something about that. And to just see that happen in me is a form of close noticing. It is a form of letting your experience go across you. And it's wonderful to acknowledge finally that we don't live our lives. Something is living our lives through us. And that's a very interesting conception. And I know I've heard you say online that that the idea of blame is an error, and I think so too. There is, although I seem to be freely moving my hands and I'm the agent of doing this, when I close notice the actual nature of will, it becomes easily identifiable through reflection that there is no such thing as freedom in my will. I'm always acting according to desire, which I don't choose. Chocolate or vanilla? I'll take chocolate. I like it. Why do you take it? Because I like it. But did you choose to like it? Ah, no. Everything you do through desire that seems to be free is done under the agency, invisible and undetectable, of desire. Which means, good Lord, what the hell is the judge going to do? He can't sentence anybody anymore. Well, there are some issues that we can discuss, and that's not the time for that necessarily. But it's important to understand that there is only, according to all the mystics and all the saints, Baba and Aurobindo, there's only one actor in creation, and that's this infinite intelligence that is manifesting you and me and this electronic communication we're in right now and everything. Okay, that's a subject that I'm fond of, because that was the first philosophical conundrum that fascinated me when I was a young man. Free will, I couldn't understand it. Mm.
Well,
And it has fascinated humanity for thousands of years.
it is
Yeah,
a constant sense of fascination, and I think will continue to be so, this
yeah,
conundrum of free will.
yeah.
Well, the book that we have been discussing is called Everything Makes Sense. And Tim, I thank you for your book. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you and talking with you, and I'm delighted to find someone of your intelligence interested in astrology. You probably know that Isaac Newton was walking on the beach with a friend of his, and his friend scolded him for being interested in astrology, and he said, "Sir, I have studied the matter. You have not."
Yes,
Anyway, yeah.
absolutely. Well, I am putting a link to your book in the description box. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Well, I have a poorly established website. It's been reconstructed. I've just moved, and so it's just everything's kind of a mess in my life. But I have a website called timgarvin.com, and the book, of course, is available on Amazon. I'm also a novelist, and I will say that I have another book on Amazon. Well, several books, but one of them is called Bhajan, and Bhajan really is a fictional treatment of of many of the themes, and it's about a traveling zoo, and it's an adventure story, and it's a lot of fun to read, and it's a suspenseful story, and interesting, and full of awakening as well. They get a tiger who has been raised in India by what are known as the God intoxicated, a must they call them in India, and the tiger he purrs, and tigers don't purr, lions do, but this one does purr, and that purr awakens the inner being of these members of the zoo, and it's a fascinating story, and I recommend it to you. Yeah.
Well, I certainly would love to read it. Thank you for
Yeah.
mentioning it to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I will
Well,
put a link to your website also in the description box. Tim, thank you
sure.
so much.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you, Anna. Be well. I'll talk to you again sometime, hopefully.
Indeed. I'm sure that
Okay.
having yet more conversations in the future. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Bye-bye. Much
And thank
love.
you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be talking about inside out living. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.